All right, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to close your eyes for a second and just picture this scene. It's February 1959. You're deep in the frozen, desolate expanse of the Soviet Union's Ural Mountains. The wind is just absolutely howling. Complete darkness surrounds you, and a group of 9 highly experienced hikers is venturing onto a treacherous, remote slope known to the locals as Dead Mountain. As we're going to explore today, that name would prove horrifically accurate, because these 9 hikers, they would never be seen alive again.
You see, 9 hikers, no survivors, no answers. But you have to understand, these weren't just some weekend amateurs making a careless mistake in the wild. Not at all. They were highly trained students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were incredibly experienced, physically prepared, and knew exactly what they were doing in extreme winter conditions. Yet somehow, they inexplicably vanished into the bitter cold, leaving behind literally one of the most baffling mysteries of the 20th century. Section 1. Journey to Dead Mountain, the group's final route.
So their expedition was meticulously planned. It was led by a 23-year-old named Igor Dyatlov, who was a deeply experienced hiker with multiple major expeditions under his belt. On January 28th, we get their last contact via a letter. And in it, they reported being in really good spirits, just full of excitement for the trek. By February 2nd, they made camp on Kolitsiakol. Now, in the indigenous Mansi language, that translates directly to Dead Mountain. After that, just total eerie silence. It wasn't until weeks later, on February 26th, that a massive search party finally tracked them down and made a truly chilling discovery.
Which brings us to Section 2, a disturbing discovery, the scene at Dead Mountain. When the searchers found the camp, the tent was intact, but it had been cut open from the inside. Just pause and think about the implications of that for a second. This was the very first bizarre clue. These completely rational, prepared hikers casually left. Actually, scratch that. They didn't just leave. They desperately slashed their way out of their own tent in the dead of night. They literally destroyed their only source of protection to escape something. And they did this in minus 30 degrees Celsius. I mean, fleeing into the pitch black darkness in weather that cold is a sheer act of madness. But they did it. And they did it without their heavy coats, without their survival equipment, and incredibly, without even their boots. They ran out into a lethal howling blizzard, essentially barefoot. Section 3. The impossible evidence beyond hypothermia. Now, you might be thinking, okay, maybe they just panicked and froze to death. But when 4 of the bodies were discovered later under the snow, the injuries were horrific and frankly totally inexplicable. We're talking fractured skulls, catastrophic chest injuries that forensic experts said were comparable to the sheer trauma of a high-speed car crash. And shockingly, one victim was completely missing her tongue, her eyes, and her lips. But here is the kicker. Compounding this massive physical trauma, there were absolutely 0 external marks on their skin to explain the blunt force. Nothing. And to make matters even stranger, their clothing tested significantly above normal background levels for radiation. Section 4. Analyzing the theories. Searching for an explanation. So what does this all mean? Let's play investigator for a minute and look at the avalanche theory versus the evidence. Now, an avalanche is considered the most scientifically supported explanation. In fact, in 2019, Russian authorities officially reopened the investigation and announced an avalanche as their definitive final conclusion. But here's the problem. That announcement satisfied almost no one who had actually studied the case. Why? Because the tent itself showed 0 avalanche damage, and the slope gradient of Dead Mountain was entirely below standard avalanche thresholds. The physical evidence just simply does not match that official conclusion. Next, we have the military testing theory versus the evidence. We know for a fact the Soviet military conducted weapons tests in the Ural region around that time. And this theory neatly accounts for those weird, highly elevated radiation readings found on the hikers' clothing, as well as the sheer concussive force that could cause car crash-like chest trauma without actually breaking the skin. It makes a lot of sense, right? However, despite how well it aligns with some of the evidence, absolutely nothing regarding military involvement has ever been officially confirmed or documented. Finally, we arrive at the unknown phenomena theory versus the evidence. And guys, this is a truly eerie possibility. Several of the hikers' own diaries directly reference seeing unexplained lights in the sky during their trek. Adding incredible weight to this, multiple members of the rescue search parties reported seeing those exact same strange lights hovering over the region during that specific time. It is a chilling, totally unconfirmed variable in an already crowded field of bizarre clues. Section 5. The unanswered questions, a lasting mystery. Let's talk about those missing facial features. The tongue, the eyes, the lips. These were officially attributed to animal predation by the authorities. Seems like a simple, natural explanation, right? Scavengers. But experienced forensic investigators who have looked deeply into the case strongly question this narrative. They argue that the specific injury patterns are simply not consistent with scavenging animals. Time and time again, the details of this case completely resist a simple official explanation. Which brings us to the central, unsolvable paradox of this entire explainer. I want you to really ask yourself this. What terrified 9 rational human beings enough to make them flee into a blizzard barefoot? These were not panicked novices. They were careful, prepared experts. For them to willingly cut open their only shelter and run into minus 30-degree winds to their certain deaths, they had to be facing a threat that they perceived as far more dangerous than the lethal cold outside. Ultimately, whatever they saw, whatever they heard, and whatever caused them to flee into the night remains their secret. The pass where they died is now officially named after their 23-year-old leader, Igor Dyatlov. But Dead Mountain itself is still incredibly remote, still howling with wind, and still largely unexplored. The Dyatlov Pass incident stands as one of history's most chilling mysteries, leaving us with one final haunting thought to take away. What really happened out there in the dark?